I came across Prabhupada's books and had a very profound transformative experience immediately. Just the whole world shifted, the whole perspective shifted, and I woke up. I knew that I had found my truth, my home. In Prabhupada's presence, I felt completely transported to the spiritual world, just being in his area of being. I found that really throughout my life, it's the japa that has saved me, sustained me. Learning to call out to Krishna and just go there, to finally raise your hands in complete surrender. I'm yours. Whatever you do, however you do it.
From Alachua, Florida, this is Nectar Talks.
In collaboration with Krishna.com.
And in service to our Bhakti community.
Hare Krishna. Hare Pranada, it's really an honor to have you here in our Nectar Talk studio.
Yeah.
It's really great for me to be able to connect with devotees in our community and learn about their the twists and turns in their both material lives and spiritual lives. And so I'm really looking forward to learning from you and your experience. I know you have a lot that you can share with us and our audience and our community here in Alachua. I'm really looking forward to finding out what were some of the important themes in your life, which I know have probably emerged in your books. You're actually an award-winning author, so that's exciting to have you and to learn about some of the things you've written about. I know it's all revolving around Bhakti, and that's what we're here for. So you met Srila Prabhupada when you were only 16 years old. Maybe to get started, you could tell us a little bit about the framework of your life at that time. What was happening?
Well, I entered into the ashram in Los Angeles when I was 16, and I saw Prabhupada when I was maybe 17 and a half, something like that. I had been searching quite seriously for many years. In fact, from the time I was 8 years old, a very serious search, and reading a lot. And I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I was in the middle of the hotbed of the counterculture. So I had access to all the different ideas going around, and of course all the books. Anyway, I came across Prabhupada's books and had a very profound transformative experience immediately. Just the whole world shifted, the whole perspective shifted, and I woke up. And I knew that I had found my truth, my home. And so I joined the LA Temple, and I saw Prabhupada on his last visit to Los Angeles in 1976, which is when I was initiated. And that was extremely moving experience on a number of levels, but mostly because in Prabhupada's presence, at least, I mean, I hear from others, but I felt completely transported to the spiritual world, just being in his area of being. And everything he did was so saturated with love for Krishna and love for us that it was quite overwhelming. I remember in one of the things I wrote, I said that my feeling at that time was like a wild thirst that was just insatiable. You couldn't get enough of this moving experience.
How did that thirst present itself when you were only 8 years old?
You want the story?
Sure.
Okay. So I was watching, I was by myself, and we had a new TV. I think it was a color. It was like brand new to have a color TV. And I was watching a program. They were talking about these ancient manuscripts that were in a foreign language, and the people who knew the language were dying off. And they were presenting a situation where these texts had spiritual and material knowledge, and the potentiality of that knowledge being lost. They were describing that. I just was aghast that adults could allow such a thing to happen, spiritual knowledge lost to humanity. And I turned off the TV, and I was just from that time on consumed by a prayer that came to me as I wanted to see or be introduced to the books of the absolute truth. I have no idea where I got that term, because I was in a Catholic school, I was only 8 years old, and my parents weren't talking like that, so I don't know where that came from. I'm thinking maybe a past life.
Sure.
But anyway, this prayer was very consuming. Literally, I practically gave up playing outside, and I was just very anxious to find the books of the absolute truth, and they weren't forthcoming. And I remember going into the living room and trying to read the Bible, and couldn't crack the code. And I was not impressed with the way Christianity was presented in school or in the church. So I kept on looking, and by the time I was 12, I was paying attention to a lot that's going on in the adult world, and I started really delving deeply into reading. And I remember asking my father one time coming back from work, and I said, it seems like you're a spiritual seeker and I'm one, so could we read at night when you get back from work? And he embraced that idea immediately. And we read, like Dev and Ouspensky. We went through the Bible. We read a lot of Zen Buddhism, Be Here Now, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, just all the books that were coming out at the moment. And that's how my search, and then I found Prabhupada's books. I went to Sausalito, to the Tides bookstore, to buy my father his birthday present for his 36th birthday. We were right in the height of reading and studying. And I went to buy Autobiography of a Yogi because it was the hot item, and they had the, hardback copy. I went and I grabbed the book, and something caught my eye on the lower shelf, the shelf that was like on the ground that you don't look at, right? And I picked it up, and these two books, which were Easy Journey to Other Planets and Beyond Birth and Death, and I was like, wow, that's really different, and a picture of Prabhupada on the back, and very, I was moved, but it was like, no, that's not what I came for, and I put them back, and I went to grab Autobiography of Yogi. I couldn't take it. I could not take Autobiography of Yogi. I went back to the books and back, like for about 15 minutes, and I thought, I'm never indecisive. And here I am so indecisive, and I thought, no, I have to get these books. So I grabbed those two books.
Wow.
And I took them. But it wasn't until about, 3 years later before I read them. And I sat down, this time I was just turned 16, maybe I was just 15, and I read those books, and the books of the absolute truth had arrived. It was so clear immediately, and it was powerful. I was crying, and I was like, my whole life is got to change, which was a scary thought. But I had in my prayer added, if you show me, because for years it wasn't coming, and I was even getting a little suicidal. I was so anxious for spiritual knowledge. And I had made a commitment after a few years in my prayer that if you show me the books of the absolute truth, I will surrender. Mm. So when I read those books and I understood they were books of the absolute truth, I was like, oh my God, now I have to surrender. That was very scary, especially when I found out what they look like.
Right. It's amazing. I'm kind of putting things together that so many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples clearly are coming from previous lives and picking up at a very advanced stage, because that to have those kinds of searches and deep yearnings at such a young age, clearly it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, it's coming from somewhere.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Okay, so you ended up joining the temple in Los Angeles at that age. How was that transition? You mentioned your father, who you were reading spiritual books with. Did he like that idea? Or?
No, in fact, he had a negative opinion about the Hare Krishnas. I didn't even know he knew about the Hare Krishnas, and it was a moment where I made an emotional disconnect from my parents, because I had to move forward in my spiritual life, and I knew that in order to do that, I was going to have some time where I could completely absorb myself and get strong. Because, here you are, 16 years old. the world is open to you, right? You're young, attractive, and everything is available, and you're turning your back from everything. And so to take up what we did, the austerities, the regulative principles, the chanting, that required a lot of determination, a lot of conviction, and a lot of assistance from the institution, the temples, the devotees there, and engagement in service, active service. So it was a moment where I made a disconnect.
So it's interesting because I always considered that growing up in Krishna consciousness meant that that's how I applied to myself. I was born in the movement. But if you join at 16, you're also growing up in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
You've grown up in ISKCON.
Yeah.
So how would you describe that upbringing, so to speak, of your several decades up until today? How would you describe that growth in being in this movement?
Well, there's a lot of levels that we could take that question. There's a lot of directions.
I'll just pick one.
Well, I would say the initial experience was just ecstatic. It was such a connection with the philosophy, especially. I was very attracted to the theology, the philosophy, and it was very exciting because Prabhupada was in the process of translating the Bhagavatam. So we were getting, and the BBT was in LA, so the book production was going on there, the artists were there, and we were getting information regularly about where we are in book production, and then the books would come out, and we just would devour the book, whether it was, I think it was the end of the third canto was coming out when I was in Los Angeles, and we just waited, with bated breath for the next volume. So it was exciting. It was a lot of austerity, extreme austerity. I look back and I think, you have to be young and stupid to do that, maybe. Either that, or I would say more likely we were lifted by Prabhupada, and we were carried by him in a way that I don't think we really understood until after we lost him. And then there was an exodus out of the movement, and we ourselves, struggled and failed in different ways. But he was carrying us, and we felt that energy. We felt that we were moved by it, and then I was doing book distribution initially, and that was a very amazing experience because it was like a direct connection with Krishna. You would be having you're trying to dissolve the false ego and do this very hard thing of handing somebody a book and asking them for money when you really didn't want to. Yeah. And but you were in dialogue with Krishna, and you were trying to see the super soul in the heart, and you were trying to see Krishna in your own heart, and you were trying to act on a spiritual platform. And that was reciprocated in a lot of different amazing ways. So there was this engaging relationship with Krishna in that service. So initially it was, for me, just beautiful, just ecstatic, and you just learn to tolerate the austerities because you're getting so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you're highlighting that when we put ourselves into that level of vulnerability, such as distributing books, it's so conducive to reciprocation with Krishna.
It does. It reciprocates.
What are some other ways that you found maybe down the line in your life where it wasn't through book distribution, but you also were able to connect on a strong level, maybe in a similar way, but not through book distribution?
Well, any seva did that. Especially when you were attentive to it, and the reasons for offering the seva, your consciousness in doing it, was profound experience to have full-time engagement. And sadhana, and reading the philosophy, that was very nourishing, extremely nourishing. And it strengthened, like when you're learning the philosophy, so you're learning why you're doing what you're doing. It's not just sentiment or a belief system. You're strengthening the intelligence, and you're based on reason and logic why you're chanting, and then you're starting to get, so you are chanting, and then you're getting reciprocation in that dialogue with Krishna, in that, connecting with him as a person. And I found that really throughout my life, it's the japa that has saved me, sustained me, shown me. It would literally, I know that Krishna, he was responding to my attempt to call out to him and bring his holy name into my life. So in ways such as knowing how to make decisions, which decisions to make. These are all very personal, and sometimes they can be very confusing. But I felt such a strong guidance. Even when I made mistakes, the name was there to help me understand how I could improve. And then, of course, as you're chanting, you're seeing all these anarthas that you have to work on, and that takes a lot of time to work on those anarthas, and in addition to having life going on. But so I think the sadhana has been a undeniable height of my spiritual life.
And when you say sadhana for yourself, is that mainly japa, or are there other forms to your sadhana that you would put under that term?
Well, they've been, it's developed over the years, what my sadhana looks like. When I was in the ashram, it was a full morning program, Bhagavatam class, seva all day long, evening program, and of course japa. And then all of that included reading, which I'm not sure if everyone was reading, but I was. My day off Sankirtan, I would sit down with a book and just be there all day long with the philosophy. So reading and chanting has always been there. Then, about 30 years ago, I became quite ill, and I've never regained the strength and stability and health. And so it was very much turning to japa. I could no longer go to the temple. So it was not, it didn't look like that anymore. Right. But I didn't feel less connection. And it was mostly japa and reading, but mostly japa.
I definitely want to come back to that part, because I know there's a book that you wrote, which is about suffering and
when illness takes hold.
When illness takes hold.
Hopeful words for sadhakas.
And a good friend of mine, he told me that book is so important to him, and that if he were to ever enter that kind of a phase of life, he knows it's going to be such an important key to his spiritual
Just to be clear,
journey.
Archana Siddhi, my god sister, co-authored that book.
Okay, wonderful. So you have children.
I have a son.
You have a son. So tell us a little bit about the transition from the ashram life, and then you had a family, and I believe you even had quite an important career in your life as well.
Had a career, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you want that conversation exactly to go. I have a son, and he's a casualty of our institution. I don't talk to him, he doesn't talk to me. So it's a very painful loss, right? It's an extremely painful loss.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and it is for all the mothers who have made that unwitting, stupid sacrifice. But as far as, so I had, my first marriage dissolved. My husband left me. And then some years later, I married Nagaraj. Around the ISKCON was showing financial problems pretty quick after Prabhupada left the planet. And by 1980, it was getting bad. And then by 1984, 85, the institution was collapsing on a financial level. And so we were told to move out, and your ashram life was over in a day, overnight, and you had to move out immediately. Oh. And, or at least I did. I'm not sure everyone did. But so we had to figure out, and now in our late 20s, without any, any resume, any career experience. I had no education. I didn't finish 10th grade of high school, and all of a sudden, you're in the world. So luckily, I connected with this one devotee named Ram Das, and he had started a print brokerage company called Palace Press. So I took up a job there, which was all based on commissions, and so there was no regular income, but gradually built that up and received an income. And then I later started my own print brokerage company, but it was very much, when you're doing something that you're responsible for, generally have to put in a lot of hours. You're not just pushing a clock. It's not 30 hours or 40 hours. It's whatever needs to get done to sustain a business. And both of them were multi-million-dollar businesses. Not that I made millions, but they had that kind of an income. And so, which meant a lot of responsibility, and it was manufacturing, which was very difficult. And it's also an industry that's run by males. So that was an additional layer. I already had that in ISKCON, and now I had to have that outside as well. You just put in a lot of hours, and I was thinking I need to put money away for retirement, and I wanted to give money to different projects, so I gave a lot of money while I had those businesses, and that's on the career front.
And so that was for how many years?
Nearly 20.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about how would you compare your devotional life, both inside and outside through your sadhana practice, compared to the ashram life, and now having to go into this, like you said, from one day to the next, your life is completely different.
Yeah.
And how did that play out for you? Was it easy to figure out, or were you at peace with it? Because I know it's often a theme. You go to a retreat or a class, and you always hear, how do you balance career life and spiritual life? So how was that for you?
It's interesting because I think my generation had the advantage that we had this ashram training, which there was you just chanted 16 rounds, and you went to the full morning program, and then you had a full day. So you already had the makings of that base, sadhana base, and it just followed me, basically. I don't think it just followed me. I think it was because I was very serious about sadhana and spiritual life. To me, it was like absolute requirement that I continue, even though I was now, working even a little harder. I was the sole financial supporter in our family, which was a heavy pressure. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, a mom, a housewife, the cook, the cleaner, the laundrier, just how do you do all that? But somehow I figured it out. And I didn't sacrifice, when my health, I didn't sacrifice the morning program initially even, but then when my health collapsed, I eventually had to give up most of the morning program. Started with the Mangal Artik and then has been gradually increasing till I can't make it to the temple. I'm not well enough. But so that feeling of being sustained by japa and nourished by it, and being in regular communication with Krishna, and feeling that I was getting, based on my acceptance of that part of the relationship, my commitment to my relationship with Krishna in that way, that I was getting a lot of guidance and insight. And that's been my experience. There's nothing like having, that's a priority. It was just like, this is the priority. Everything else has to be done, and we don't want to miss the beat on these important things, but my spiritual life is the priority. Anyway.
You mentioned some important things that I certainly don't want to dismiss. You talked about having to deal with a society that's mostly directed by men, both in the movement and in your career. How did you respond to that? What's been your journey with that? I know, jumping to today, you're involved in the Vaishnavi ministry, but
I retired from that.
Hear.
Yeah, I mean, when I first joined, I noticed the difference between men and women and the hierarchical structure that was already pretty well formed in ISKCON at that time, 1975. Jodharani was giving classes, and I remember someone flew to Hawaii and talked to Prabhupada and said, we don't want her giving classes, we'd like her to stop giving classes. And Prabhupada said, no, she should be giving classes. And when the devotees came back from Hawaii, they stopped her giving classes. So, I was seeing things, and I was not unaware of them. But then at a certain point in my devotional service, I became a temple commander. I was basically a temple president in one temple, but I didn't have the title because that wasn't allowed. And there was a lot of attacking me because of that. So I had these managerial skills that were just like natural, and I was doing well, but it wasn't welcomed. And then I started putting things together, and I started thinking, what I'm seeing is not good. I'm seeing, and I had already been aware of the women's parties. I was on the LA Women's Party for a while. We had gone to Jiva's party in Berkeley. We were hearing behind the scenes awful things about the New Vrindavan party. And then there was the New York party. And what I was hearing was more than alarming. It was awful. And so I had, I've been hearing that, then I'm personally experiencing it more in my seva, where people are continually saying, we're taking your service away, and it was just because I was a woman. So threatening my Krishna consciousness. And when I started really paying attention to the voice, I couldn't ignore anymore. And I started seeing so many of my god sisters are being abused, and I knew so many of them that were being beaten by their husbands because, you can beat a woman in a mridanga. And I just couldn't close my eyes to it anymore. It got to the point where I had to speak, and I was going to speak, but it took me 2 years to find my voice, because it was just unheard of for you to speak up against the status quo and the social. I mean, every single class was how women were less intelligent and Maya. And you're talking, I don't know how men did this, but they were talking to a room full of also women. They would just berate us every single day. Well, it became a situation, we were so disempowered, so disenfranchised, so psychologically and emotionally abused that I think it's the source of our child abuse in the movement. We disregarded the Grihastha ashram, we made light of it, we completely abused the women, and they became completely unable to protect their children. And this was too much for me. But before the child abuse became known, because this was in 1985 when I started waking up, and we hadn't heard the child abuse just yet. So I decided that I must speak, and I wrote a letter, and I tried to get God Sisters to stand with me, because this was a big deal to stand against the whole movement, but I couldn't find them. They were terrified, and they were already heartbroken. Many of these people were already extremely damaged and heartbroken. But I spoke out. One God Sister stood up with me. I became labeled as first of all, I was ruining Prabhupada's movement. I was the black sheep of the family, got veiled death threats. And ultimately they figured they'll label me as a woman's liber. That was like the kiss of death, right, at the time. It was like, you don't even know what a woman's liver is, okay? But anyway, so I was a woman's liber. I joined up with Sudharma at the time, and we started actively pursuing this agenda of education and clarifying what Prabhupada did say and didn't say about women, what he intended, what our experience was with Prabhupada, which was very different from how the men were treating us. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I started a newsletter called Priti Lakshanam, which I wanted to communicate with the GBC body. I felt that there was not communication between the GBC and the devotee population. And I thought that was very wrong, and they couldn't guide and they couldn't manage without communication. So I started this newsletter, and I edited it, financed it, printed it, laid it out just by myself, and sent it to all the GBC members and gurus at the time, and just trying to get a dialogue going, trying to open up dialogue. That went on for a few years. In fact, it was nice because I started also a personals ad so that devotees could try to find partners. There was so much socially wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then I even started what I called Adopt a Child, and in a couple of devotee families who could not keep their children, I found a devotee home for them. So I was trying to start some social initiatives, and right around that time is when when I wrote the letter I was writing the letter in 1987 that kind of started the conversation, is when I first heard about the child abuse. We were I had been in Gitanagari, my son was in the Gitanagari ashram, and some boys were coming back from Vrindavan. And it was all very hush-hush, except for that I was hearing the sobs of their mothers. And it was just god-awful. And I just felt like I'm now really emboldened. You're like, I'm not stopping. This is just unacceptable. And so that went on for a while. Sudharma was networking with high-level management. She was overseeing the PR on the Robin George case, and she was a very competent woman. And the leaders in North America were starting to pay attention to her because she was extremely competent. She was basically managing the whole campaign, which ISKCON at that time was going to make it or break it based on that law case, which was at the time, I can't remember, $35 million or something. We didn't have even assets in that. Anyway, so she was gaining attention. I was doing the Priti Lakshanam. We were able to start with the help of Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, Anuttama, Bir Krishna Maharaj, the women's ministry. They helped and got us a vote on the North American management, which they have since taken away. Sudharma sat on the GBC for a number of years. Both of us have resigned from that, but the women ministry is still going on. And I'll show you, this is something, if anyone, I documented the history of what happened in the movement with women. You can find that free online, an audiobook as well. That is basically an oral history that I thought was important to keep available for future generations. Yeah. You know, we tried, we made some progress, far from enough, but it wasn't that we were just, taking it always. We really did try.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for such an important contribution to the movement, which is also still growing.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for the amazing efforts of people like you, we would still be stuck in.
Well, we are. I mean, Alachua is a very good place for families and acceptance of women, but that's not the case in many temples, right, including even in North America, but mostly India and the East Bloc and some of these places. And I feel like we've been basically marginalized, just ignored. We're not respected. We can only take it so far. And I'm really feeling that unless our brothers and fathers and sons come together and speak up and against this situation for women and children, we're going to still have these very backward, abusive and offensive situations. Mm-hmm. We're lucky here; we don't feel it, right, but it's felt by women and children elsewhere.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing awareness to that. Hopefully, we can all keep contributing to this important protection of women and children in Prabhupada's movement. So I'm sure this is one example of how you eventually turned to writing. Tell us a little bit about the different themes that you focused on in the different books And I know you have some here that we'd love to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, these books are not my. These are the outcome of my practice of Krishna consciousness to share bhakti. So I am very opposed to bigotry, sexism, sectarianism, these ways which we dishonor bhakti and keep it from reaching a broader audience. Right. It's painful to watch people come and are interested, and then they're shown something, then they see, women in the back or how they're treated, and they're like, I'm out of here, I'm not coming back. And I just feel like that's a tragedy. It's just an absolute tragedy. So these books are coming from like a 20-year meditation about, Prabhupada told us you should reach your American brothers and sisters, and I felt that in our financial necessity and just circumstances and the way things went, our temples largely became shelters for the Indian population, and it was difficult for Westerners to make inroads into temples these days. So I wanted to respond, I was told in my heart to respond to this point that Prabhupada said we should preach to our American brothers and sisters. And I felt that, I saw that many people had a difficult time reading Prabhupada's books. Mm-hmm. They just have, it's too much Sanskrit, too much foreign concepts, they have a hard time entering. Right. And Prabhupada told us to write, and so I wrote this marketing campaign in 2002 called the Bhakti campaign. I presented it to the BBT, and basically it was an idea that we write books like this and put authors on a speaking circuit along with kirtan, make Bhakti a household word which would be defined according to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, mm-hmm. and prasadam, right? So I was seeing these, you could call them introductory books or bridge books or just books that people could relate to, that were relevant and relatable. And so I presented that. The trustees were very impressed. They immediately formed on the spot something called the Special Projects. And it was it covered a couple different things, but it was to push forward this initiative I had presented. And we tried to do that. It didn't work out. Finally, in 2007, I resigned. I was so disappointed that it didn't make it, because by that time, Kirtan and Bhakti had entered the yoga asana community, and we had not owned it, which was what I had seen that we could possibly do. Like, we lost the boat on vegetarianism. I mean, even Phil Goldberg in American Veda explains how really it was to Prabhupada. It was Prabhupada's doing that vegetarianism became attractive in North America because of his Sunday love feasts. I mean, this is just historical fact. Yeah. So we lost being owners of that, right? Although that was the gift that Prabhupada gave us. And so I saw this, and it was just so heartbroken. Another heartbreak, right? We have all these heartbreaks in life. That which you love the most gives the most pain, right? That's what we experience in relationships. Yeah. So anyway, I resigned, and when I resigned, I was quite sick at the time. I had just had a 5th surgery, and a little voice said, write. And I said, yeah, write. I don't know how to write. I'm not writing. Anyway, long story is then I studied writing. I started writing unsuccessfully, and then had a breakthrough, and the Bhakti trilogy came out. These are introductions to Krishna consciousness. These aren't my these are removing all the ISKCONisms, which are so off-putting and they're odd and they're not inviting at all. Mm-hmm. So removing that took a while to take out of my language, because I did grow up in ISKCON as a young girl. All of the words and terms we use, and it becomes so familiar and hackneyed and unattractive. It just loses meaning, right? Sure. So just taking out the dogma and the fanaticism, and just giving an overview, an explanation of the 3 energies and the goddess Radha, which was very important to me, because I was reading a lot of feminist literature, and I was watching this topic this dialogue in the community, broader community, about the feminine divine and sacred feminine, and women turning away from patriarchy, so they're looking to goddesses, but then they were exploiting goddesses, and whatever they did write about Radha was absolutely horrendous, and I felt like we needed a corrective of that, and it had to come from the Gaudiya Vaishnava community. So that's what I did here. And then Prema Kirtan, the primary anga of Bhakti, and I specifically named it a title that's difficult, Prema Kirtan, instead of just Kirtan, because I think it's our responsibility as Kirtaniyas to define the difference between music, that's Kirtan that's just music, Kirtan that seeks mukti, and Kirtan that seeks prema. And the only Kirtan that seeks prema is that of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by using the Upanishadic verse, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So I wanted to bring that into the Kirtan explosion. I think it's an important distinction to make. I think it's an important tool, actually. The kind of feedback I'm getting is powerful. I think it's an important tool for all our Kirtaniyas that are having such a big impact to give the theology and the philosophy, and this does that. And I insert what it means what a Kirtan yoga practice looks like, what Kirtan actually means, the power of sound, both material sound and sacred sound, where a Kirtan practice takes you. So, this is just a way to be relevant and relatable to the broader audience.
Yeah, that's such a really nice distinction, and such an important distinction of the different levels of Kirtan. We hear so much, chant from the heart. And
but what's in the heart, What's in the heart?
Right.
And where can you go with that? What are the opportunities that we have? What are what's our potential as human beings? And some of the Kirtan leaders are giving that, and more are starting to, but we're not giving people as much. They don't know why they're experiencing what they're experiencing, and if they knew, they might dive in a little deeper, instead of just coming to a Kirtan every once in a while. They could make significant transformations in their being. So,
I was just in Puri, and while I was there, it was my first ever proper pilgrimage, a yatra, super amazingly organized, 10,000 devotees, and while I was there, I was speaking with Shesha Prabhu and Mother Madhumati, who were there also, and I was asking them, I want to find a way to somehow bring some of this experience back home, and I know it's an environment that is so different, it's impossible to bring the full experience of a yatra and being in the holy place of Lord Chaitanya back to our Western world. And their recommendation was to think very carefully of some very manageable, practical, good habits that I could bring back into my life. And the one that they offered is that I should go and simply have kirtan with them at their house regularly. And it's true.
Self-interest.
But no, I agree. To be able to dive into kirtan, it's not that easy, actually. I know for myself, I don't know if it's that I have a picky ear as a musician or if I'm just not advanced enough, but it's not easy for me to really enter into the depths of kirtan, on my desires demand, it takes a lot.
It's a practice.
Right.
It's a yoga practice.
Right.
And in my experience also, whether it's kirtan or japa or reading, which is also kirtan, or speaking, which is also kirtan, it really has to be fortified by reason. It's not automatic because of the contamination of the heart. It's not just, I'm in ecstasy when I pick up the japa bag or,
right.
In any kirtan whatsoever that doesn't sound nice. But with intelligence, when the intelligence is fortified, then it gives you reasons to enter in and find a way to go deep when the externals aren't like necessarily satisfying, right? Because you're going into a different, you're going through into it in a different way. You're not going through the external environment, you're going internally there in a whole different state of mind. And in order to sustain that, I mean, how do you chant japa every day for 50 years? Through anything, through the heartbreak, through the work, through just, you know, bad health. How do you sustain that? Well, it helps by knowing why you're doing it in a very profound, deep way. Yeah. And that means regularly hearing. Even if it's only 15 minutes a day, it means regularly immersing yourself with the message of Shastra, which will give you the way to go internal.
That's so practical. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Another thing, one of my experiences coming back from this yatra is I chanted probably without a doubt, the best block of 16 rounds that I've ever experienced in that morning japa period after Mangal Artik in the big pandal. And while there, it happened on day 2. So it was after the first day of going to the Siddha Bakul and the Gambhira and all these. I was literally walking along the pages of the Chaitanya Charitamrita for the first time in my life. And I had the most amazing 16 rounds. I mean, they just flew by. They were completely immersive. I had so many realizations and meditations. And I tried to replicate that the following 6 days, and I wasn't able to.
Krishna was just giving me a little taste.
He showed me it's possible.
This is the way. This is the way. Come. Keep going.
And so now that I'm back home, I'm still struggling. I'm keeping up with the 16 rounds, which, you know, I kind of went through 3 years of not chanting properly 16 rounds. But yeah, what you just mentioned is still very much an exercise and a habit and an ability that I need to develop to be able to develop that intent and that understanding of what I'm about to do. And yeah, we have so many distractions, so many when we're in our home environment with all the responsibilities. But yeah, I think the 15 minutes of immersion might be a good tool. I'll try that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing you can study Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, but then there's also some nice books on chanting, you know, like Mahanidhi Swami has something, Satchidananda Swami has something, Mahatma has something, a little something, and yeah, they're good tidbits, you know, to meditate. Like if you do it before you go to bed at night, then you're waking up with a certain intent, right? And you're entering with that mood.
So I want to jump to this other topic of illness. It's funny thinking about illness as we grow older. I remember as a child, as a youth, having grown up in Krishna consciousness, birth, death, old age, and disease. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't quite understand the disease part. From what I hadn't had enough life experience. And of course, now I'm about to turn 45. I've had some chronic back pain for the last 3 years. You actually told me some treatments I should try out. And of course, I see it all around me. I see the unavoidable future of old age, having experienced it a little bit and thinking, I'm only 45. You know, there's so much more deterioration this body's going to have to go through. And so I think it's a really important theme that everyone's going to experience on some level or another. And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about what are some of the realizations you share in that book about illness and bhakti. Yeah,
Archana Siddhi, I have each of us have an essay. Well, I have a couple of essays. She has an essay, and then we have quotes from different texts encouraging us to how to cope with loss of health or other losses. So there's like that appendix too. And then we have a question and answers. The experience is very enlightening. It's very difficult, and it's very changing in an extreme way. You just, in my own situation, I was extremely active person. I had done a lot of service. Could do a lot of service. I had different skills. And one day Krishna sat me down and said, "It's over." That's like really hard. It's really hard. First of all, you're going through all this guilt, like why am I not contributing? And then you have to come to terms with, you're not the controller. You have no say about what's going on here. And that brings out a lot of, can bring out anger, but it can also bring out a deepening surrender. It depends on how you approach it, right? So there's a grieving period, there's a grieving period of what the loss is and the significance of the loss, and being alone. You're very, very alone in illness. Even some of my best friends, I could be in a hospital and not have anybody come. So it's a lonely journey, and it's a journey deep inward, and that is very powerful. And I think there's a reason for disease and old age, and that's for us to make that journey, especially before we die, because here we're taking, everything is taken away from you in death. And so I'm very grateful for all the suffering, the lack of being able to do, because I've learned how to go internal, and it slows you down. Life goes at a speed that's quite unmanageable mostly, And it's head spinning, right? And it's like, I can't even chant, I can't read 15 minutes to read, oh my God, I can't do that. It's just like, you out of your mind? Do you know what's going on in my life?
Mother Pranada, I appreciate your 15 minutes of encouragement.
That's great.
Have you heard of my life?
Exactly.
Right.
Let's just get real, right? I know that life,
Right.
I know that. So what illness does and old age does is it slows you down, and all of a sudden you have to be with yourself in a way that you were not with yourself before. And this is an important opportunity for transformation and personal growth. And learning to call out to Krishna and just go there, to finally raise your hands in complete surrender. I'm yours. Whatever you do, however you do it. It's a process. How do you get there? You don't get there overnight.
Right.
And I guess it's because I'm so thick-headed and I was so active. Krishna had to you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything. You're going to get this in this life.
You're scaring me because I see a lot of myself and, way too active. I'm engaged in so many things, and it's scary to think that to have that quote-unquote freedom taken away.
I got it taken away early, but that's, my journey. I don't think everyone has to go through that. But I think it's a great benefit. I think that the design is well designed.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that ultimately this is getting you ready for, most likely the process of dying. I think those who can leave this body in their sleep or a car accident, where that's actually very fortunate, because most people it's a long drawn process of suffering and pain and illness, and so to be mentally prepared for that, what we have along the way can train us.
One of the things that I learned, I learned so much, but in one of the episodes, health episodes, I learned that I can control my mind a lot more than I did. I didn't know, actually. You hear control your mind, it's like, yeah, right, I'm doing the best I can. I'm at least practicing, and I'm trying, I'm offering seva and all of this. I'm kind of there, I'm controlling my mind. I'm not out in the bar or whatever. But I discovered that that is just touching the tip of the iceberg, that mind control is not only essential, and you are forced into mind control when you're in pain all the time, when it's very intense, you've got to shut down the mind, because just to survive the next minute, it can't be telling you what it's feeling, right? It cannot be doing that in order to make it through the day. And so I discovered that I could control the mind a lot more. And what that opened for me, it liberated me in a certain way, because then I had more control about how much I'm thinking of Krishna and where I'm putting my mind. And it's like, riding a wild horse. You have to train it. At some point, you do have to have it trained. We have to do that. It's what we're called to do in spiritual life. So that's the main thing that I shared in illness, when illness takes hold, is just how much we can control the mind and how much that's necessary. And it's also what I realized, this is my seva. How I respond to this is my seva to Krishna. And how I respond by keeping a hold of the holy name, keeping a hold of hearing and chanting. The seva becomes much more internal and therefore much more alive in many ways.
It's making me think of this term of Krishna consciousness as a gradual process. We hear that so much, and it's taken me many years to come to grasps with what that means, and to be patient and learn through all these experiences, and the pain that I've experienced a little bit with my back. I see the different phases that I've gone through with that just in 3 years. It was first, this is going to go away. I threw out my back, it's going to go away. And then it didn't go away. And then it turned into 2 years of frantically trying to find a solution. Like, there's got to be a solution for this. And I tried so many different things, and nothing worked. And I kind of, thanks to our process, I came to terms with, okay, at some point, what you're due is due. And so the other side of it is, how do I learn to live with that? And so thanks for taking me from how do I learn to live with it to how do I learn from it, and how do I grow from it? Yeah,
it's very powerful.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot. Are there any specific themes that you wanted to address before we draw to a conclusion?
I think that we should give a lot of attention to each other and care for each other and help each other on the path. I think it's not easy. Well, one thing I would say also is that there is a point where your so-called material life and your spiritual life are one, and you're not living two separate lives. You're living a whole life as a whole person, as a human being, but as a lover of Krishna, attempting to grow that love of Krishna. And it's a process, as you said, and there's a lot of slippery slopes that we can find ourselves on, and mistakes that we can make. But I think we should be generous with each other and allow for vulnerability, and allow for those mistakes without judging, and develop the community as a family, which it was once in the institution. And it has largely, in some places, gone away from that. It's very sad to see. So I would say that. I did bring this. It's kind of like on the topic. I don't know if you've seen this book called Radical Personalism by Padmanabha Swami.
I saw it because you had shared it with me.
Did I?
Well, just the other day when it was one of the links. So
right.
Tell us why this book speaks to you.
Well, what I noticed when I was doing the Priti Laksham newsletter in the early 90s, I just was hankering for the personal dealings. It had become so impersonal. When I joined the temple, it was very personal. It was like a family, right? And And then it became more and more impersonal and more judgmental and more attacking. And oh my God, some of the things on the internet now are just horrendous, the way devotees attack each other. And it's shocking, actually. So I have felt for a long time the desire to see more personalism in our relationships. And I think that Padmanabha Swami has named many of the, ills that are in our own heart and in the institution or institutional settings oftentimes. Not just ISKCON, but other.
Yeah.
And the other thing is just the fracture I see in the Gaudiya Vaishnava community between the different sects. I've kind of like broadened my base of hearing, and I'm finding, wow, incredible devotees in different sanghas, right? And I feel like somehow at some point we have to come together as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And yeah, there are real issues in the past, and I know what they are because I lived them, and I wasn't happy about them. But at some point, I think we need to heal hearts, and I think this is going toward that direction. It's been something that's been on my mind for a long time, so I'm appreciative of that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's something that, so I'm one generation removed, you could say. I'm a child of first generation devotees. And I hear both. Definitely there's issues that are there on a managerial level and even that have hurt the progress of devotees. But ultimately I agree, and I hear from my peers that, yeah, we just want to kind of embrace Gaudiya Vaishnavism as a whole. It doesn't matter which particular temple branch you might be associated with. That would be really nice. I agree. I think overall, like you said, our community here is really a nice example in many ways, and what a treasure grove of association we can find here.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, thank you so much. This was really, really wonderful. If you had to answer the question, what keeps you going in Krishna consciousness today, how would you answer that?
Well, I'm here because of association of devotees and Prabhupada and the holy name, and hearing. So I would say those things that we already discussed, but I also feel very strongly, and that's why personalism is so important to me. We can't do this alone. There's no possibility of doing it alone. And we are nourished and sustained and guided and encouraged in our moments of doubt or crisis of faith by other devotees. And so I would say devotees, and I'm very grateful that they have accepted me.
Wonderful. Mother Pranada, thank you so much.
Hare
It's been
Krishna.
such a pleasure.
Nice to be here with you. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.